Alright, I am back finally. Had a little bit extra work I didn't plan on. Just keep myself pretty busy. And we had a little bit of some problem with some mods acting up. So unfortunately we had to kind of begin again. The mod in question. The mod author is no longer doing mods anymore. And there's a couple of kind of workarounds people set up. But yeah, they weren't 100%, so yeah, here we are. Here we go, full Shaun of the Dead. Yeah, probably wasn't the thing to do if I want to take their clothes, but yeah, what can you do? That thump sure is interesting. Yeah, I was kind of looking into potentially trying at some point here. I want to do Star Wars Battlefront 2, the 2005 version, not the remake. One of the used to play that game a lot when I was younger. Got back into it a couple years back on PC. Easily one of the best games I've ever played. Still to this day holds up really well. And the only problem is it's all got official Star Wars music in it. Of the way Disney is with the copyright strikes, it's not really, yeah, it's not really something I want to get mixed up in. Disney's got a lot of money and a lot of bored lawyers. Time to really be malicious if they feel so inclined. Oh, that's that one outside of Muldrop. Handy. I guess you could technically stab someone with a file. It would work and all that. But really, the file what you need to do is to get a grinder and cut her down a notch or two. I gotta love those old military military style sweaters. Actually, I have one there. They work pretty good. The one problem I have there is that you need to wear like long sleeves underneath them, really, because they are itchy as all hell. That's just a downside though, just because they're wool, and wool's disturbingly expensive to deburr is what they call it, where they remove all the rough particles off it. Actually, you always hear people talking about the hemp fabric thing, and the main reason you don't use hemp as a fabric is because hemp is a very coarse material. Burlap is made out of hemp. And they talk about people wearing sackcloth as like a punishment there's a punishment there, and they're just going to be worn raw by it. So you have to deburr it, which is doable. Like, people have done it, but the problem with deburring it, there's actually two problems with it. First one is it's expensive, and second one is that it kind of, like, wool's got a little more staying power than hemp fiber. So yeah, so wool's got a little more staying power than hemp fiber does. And wool will tend to go through the deburring process a lot better than hemp will. And hemp, the deburring process is intensive. Remember correctly, to carry out deburring, you actually have to go, and it's almost like you have to I think it's called carding, where they run it through brushes to help break up the binder. I believe it's something similar to that. We have the hemp fibers there, it breaks it down. It does break the material down though when you deburr it. And so yeah, so wool tends to, maybe we've just gotten better at doing wool, maybe, I don't know, you know. But the point is, yeah, wool tends to come through that whole process a lot better than hemp and similar fabrics, or similar materials. That being said, the whole hemp thing there are things that where it is applicable, but also a lot of people like to forget too. Yeah, I'm a farm kid there. This used to be my bread and butter back in the day. I used to work in a farmer's market, among other things. Worked with a lot of hippies and stoners. And one thing that was always a big discussion about it, but what a lot of people don't realize is that hemp and marijuana, they're similar. They aren't necessarily the same. Like actually hemp grown for making ropes and stuff. If you smoke that, well, hopefully you'll cough your lungs out. Actual hemp, like to smoke, is horrific. It's almost got no THC. It's bred for one purpose, and that purpose is making a strong, long one-piece fiber. I've heard stories about kids breaking into commercial hemp growing operations, where they're, like, providing material for burlap and rope. And long story short, yeah, it never ends well for them. Usually they end up coughing out a lung. There's really a lot of selective breeding that went into making the actual weed we know today. So, you know, be like, oh yeah, well, you could grow, you know, hemp for all this stuff. Then we could also have, you know, a side effect. As a bonus, we'd have all the, you know, all the premium weed you can smoke. And no. Especially since prohibition on cannabis. That's been in a lot of nations for quite a while there. It's kind of locked it into a situation where, like, basically growers had to be kind of covert, and it's hard to hide a 20-foot tall, you know, 20-foot tall, or for you know, everyone not the U.S. It's gonna be about 8 meters, give or take. Yes, it's around 7 meters, 6-7 meters. So they actually bred most of the marijuana plants they use these days. They're actually dwarf strains. So they're not really all that great for making fibers because you have this, you know, short, stubby little guys, and they just don't provide a good of fiber. Yeah, if you want to get into the science of it, there you can get to really, you can dig in pretty deep. Yeah, it gets pretty fascinating, especially start getting into the breeding aspects and stuff. Like plants like hemp, they had a lot of work done over the years. Yeah, like phrases like industrial hemp production. Like that's legitimately a thing. Like they were producing that stuff by, you know, hundreds of tons at a time. Then you think too, actually back in the day too, they used to have these huge plantations, essentially, almost like plantations or like full size like farms, producing just hemp. And there's a lot of people, oh yeah, well obviously they used to, you know, to smoke it all the time, you know, ancient conspiracy, whatever. But think about like your average Navy. Hell, let's not even go Royal Navy. Let's go ancient Greeks. Right? Now you look at those ships they used. Every single sail, every rope, tarps, sacks, those are all made of hemp. And they're operating on the sea. And let's be honest, I think like if you look into what seawater does to stuff, seawater, because the salt content is almost corrosive. It'll eat aluminum, bodies. There's all sorts of microbial life that something gets too wet for too long there. That'll get established and start eating it. Like, yeah, so you can make stuff like, you know. So anything organic there is basically just like, it's basically sitting on a ticking clock. You know, they'd have ships, like wooden ships. They would do, oh yeah, when they took ships out too, like they did the keel hauling, which, you know, everyone knows about, where they beach it up there and scrape the barnacles off. There's another process that they would do that is not so well known. And basically what they'd end up doing is they would actually take ships out of, like, back to dry dock, and then while they're in dry dock, give them a full, like, once over, and we're talking like replacing boards and stuff. Like the old Ship of Theseus thought experiment is actually not that inaccurate. these ships have been upgraded over and over again and modified and everything else. It's really actually pretty fascinating. We start getting that whole world. And I know Admiral Nelson, one of the things was when he first made Admiral, or he first made Captain, and he was given his first ship to command, he was actually a little bit upset about it because the ship was not suitable for a captain. Normally in the Royal Navy operational procedures, that would have been a ship given to like a lieutenant. But you know, they told him, you know, well, that's the ship you got, you know, give it a try. And so he did, and then they were like, yeah, part of the reason we're giving this ship is a little experimental. And what it was is they had put in a copper-plated hull on it, and copper is not great for a lot of sea life and such. So barnacles and stuff wouldn't get on the hull, and the hull would be smoother, and therefore it would flow through water better, especially after a couple weeks at sea. And actually, Admiral Nelson scored some of his greatest victories in that little ship. And later on, he would go on to write about how like its maneuverability was pretty much just unparalleled. It wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but it was fast and responsive to controls. But also, you gotta remember your rudder and stuff is also gonna have sea life growing on it. And that, of course, too, starts messing with its performance, so... Yeah, they're like this whole science. This whole science just kind of dedicated to keeping ships going properly. You know, it's actually really fascinating the more you get into it, too. Actually, one thing to look into, too, if you guys really like your history, the Lost Franklin expeditions are really quite interesting. This is an Arctic exploration mission to look for Northwest Passage and just general, you know, potentially, and there's a few other things that they're doing, maintaining British sovereignty over the Arctic regions up above Canada. Because Henry Hudson had claimed a lot of that area before. But, you know, you kind of have to go and be there once in a while just to kind of, like, you know, prove that you were there. Prove that it's yours, prove ownership or whatnot. Under, you know, the colonial rules. Anyway, so yeah, but the ships they used there, they were what they call monitors originally. So they were kitted out with these mortars. And you can see an example in Pirates of in Assassin's Creed Black Flag of how shipboard mortars will kind of be utilized, or like what shipboard mortars kind of look like. But they were designed for shore bombardment specifically. And the Erebus and Terror apparently were quite good at that role. Apparently they performed very well in that role. And when they were modified for Arctic use, though, they had steam engines installed. Bear in mind, very early steam engines. This is some cutting edge. This is some cutting edge stuff at the time. The steam engines included a system to retract the propellers in so they wouldn't be damaged by ice. And the hulls were thickened, completely rebuilt, with various different types of wood all layered up together to get, you know, a stronger hull. They basically took like super plywood essentially by the time all said and done. Anyway, with that stuff, I'm sorry if you hear that, my dog there is scratching himself against the floor. Anyway, it's basically like it was basically like what we call today a composite hull. But the hull was like just about 3 feet. If I remember correctly, the hull was close to a meter thick, 3 feet thick. On these ships, they were designed specifically to spend winters, plural, like there's lines spend like 2 winters in a row, basically. It's the idea of the expedition locked in the ice. And they were actually built to handle that. Structurally, they were actually built to handle ending up being trapped in ice, trapped in the pack ice. And they actually did quite well at that they actually did quite a bit better than they were intended to. Because the wrecks of them are actually in really good shape. Their large is still intact. Mostly it's just like masks and similar top structure got sheared off by accident above them. But overall, the Erebus and Terror are actually in really amazing shape. Yeah, the Erebus and Terror, they're in really amazing shape. Considering how long they've been under for. Like, yeah, they actually sent a drone in. They actually were able to get a drone inside one of them. Those underwater jobs. And they had all sorts of problems. But long story short is basically the Arctic ice is just a lot nastier than they anticipated. And Franklin was a pretty good choice for the expedition. A lot of people know Franklin provided from the Arctic. Well, basically, a couple years before, about a year before he left for that, a year or two before he left for that expedition up to the Arctic, he had done an expedition to the Antarctic, which was considered to be very successful. Yeah, this guy actually had a track record as being like, the dude you send when you need someone to check out polar regions. He was known for being he knew what he was doing in those areas. He was good at navigating them. Overall, so yeah, he's the guy, he was a pretty good guy to choose for that. But the Arctic conditions, too, honestly what it came down to is just they're more brutal than anticipated. And hey, that's what it came. Yeah, at the end of the day, that's pretty much what it came down to. And just yeah. And that's basically we started seeing all these various. That's where basically the whole expedition got doomed. There was basically like they would find themselves a few times that they found themselves not exactly in pack ice. So there's ice they were stuck. The ice they were stuck in wasn't pack ice, but it also wasn't. It was actually worse than pack ice, arguably, because it wasn't quite pack ice, but it was too thick or too thin to really walk on or move out on, or move around too much for that. And then just to really add to the suckiness of the situation, while being unsuitable to actually walk on, like move around on foot, it was also too thick to get small boats out. And a big chunk of the plan was to rely a little more on foraging. Live off the land a little bit. And what they found, but then they weren't only able to do that, so they were basically stuck with canned rations, which were done in quite a bit of a hurry. Some of them were known for, some of them were known for having weren't being sealed up properly and stuff. So these rations were pretty gnarly. the phrase botulism comes to mind. Yeah, because these things would make you, yeah, so like, you have people getting sick off the rations. The joints are soldered together with lead, quite poorly, which, is something. And then those desalinifications can use lead pipe, or used, yeah, it was lead piping. And they had tested it. There was pretty well known how lead reacted with cold fresh water, not so much warm or hot salt water, which was ended up being produced by desalinification. So combine those two factors together, you get the high lead base. You know, multiple crew members are getting sick or dying even of botulism. The fresh food that's supposed to be like supplementing your diets is just not happening. And if I had gone according to plan, they would have been just fine, even with the lead and stuff like that. Give a chance, just reduce them up, building up in the body. Um, Previous expeditions who have been doing a lot of fur trapping and stuff pretty thoroughly alienated the local population. So a lot of them were quite cagey about, going up to ships. Bear in mind, this is historically a lot of times considered to be rumor, but there are various accounts of some folks going up there who are less than savory, furs or whalers, things like that. Whaling actually was really big, and there were some pretty brutal accounts of some of the stuff that went on. Yeah, people got killed, people got kidnapped. It was a pretty nasty situation all around. So locals aren't really willing to lend as much help as maybe they could have. Plus the fact that they, even they folks living up in the Arctic, like the Inuit population, anyone says the Inuit are a lot of things, but they are But first and foremost, they are survivors. But they also live pretty. But if you talk to any of them, and ask them what's living up there, they'll tell you right off the bat that living up there is not really a guarantee of anything. I don't want to say life gets cheap up there, but let's be honest, life can get pretty. There's a line between life and death up there is pretty narrow to begin with. We're talking subsistence hunting and fishing. There was cases there, one person, there was cases there where people just, one bad, fishing trip there potentially could mean the difference between life and death in certain situations, depending on how bad the weather was. I actually worked with a fellow too, he's a buddy. A really interesting guy. Had a very colorful life. But he was First Nations local. He was a local First Nations fellow. And he was largely raised by his grandfather. And his grandfather was part of the last generation, kind of, who basically lived the original way. And taught him a lot, and that guy would work like a rented mule. And we were talking about, how, work and life and everything like that, and how to survive. He actually said, the reason I work so hard, too, is my grandfather always told me, if you don't work hard, you don't survive the winter. And this is way south of the Arctic, too much. But there are actually quite a few stories there of people who, missed an opportunity or whatnot during the winter, and they died. They starved, and that was the end of it. So, you had to, it was all hands on deck, full tilt boogie. They actually, North American history, too, is one of those things there that really doesn't get really doesn't get covered a lot in modern history books, which is really just really distressing and depressing because it's really beyond fascinating to start Indian, how the indigenous peoples of North America lived, went about their business. Um, Here in British Columbia, actually, they had a trail going up alongside the Fraser River. Some of it was canoes, a lot of it was on foot, though. And so what these guys would do lots of times is they would pack basically cedar boxes or, hide bundles or whatever else, baskets of smoked salmon. And they pack these things all the way up into, they pack the smoked salmon like basically for the winter. Um, and salmon are pretty fatty there, especially when you smoke them the old school way. They're pretty greasy, eh? So they literally had this trail though where they would be moving salmon and other related like salmon-based products from the coast down by Vancouver all the way up into central northern British Columbia. This huge trade route. And some of them would even go and there was actually too Simon Fraser. Simon Fraser used a lot of local knowledge when he explored the Fraser River. But one thing that he did that I kind of suspect is pretty indicative of how trade was done there was they took their canoes downstream, did a few portages, but they would sell the canoes at the portages to locals. And then make new. We're talking birch bark canoes too. Like they're actually very clever. They use chunks of birch bark and then basically pine sap. It'd be pine sap melted down to like a crude tar to stick them all together. Really genius. Lightweight, you could build them just about anywhere there was halfway decent birch trees and pine trees, which is basically pretty much everything east and west of the prairies. So these boats really got around all over North America. And you get the coastal First Nations too. They would tend to use dugouts quite a bit, or build canoes out of planks. They got pretty good at what they call riving, which is where you split trees down into planks, which is a really fascinating process too. But they would do that with cedar, which is soft wood, but it lasts forever without treatment, and super lightweight. Yeah, it's actually pretty easy to work. Out of all the woods out there, it's one of the easier ones to work. And so they would split these, they split planks off the cedar. And they built longhouses, which are really cool actually, the way they build those. Yeah, they did longhouses, they did canoes, both dugout and they'd actually use like plank canoes, which are really cool. They have a few examples actually down in the museum, this big museum down in Victoria, BC's capital, provincial capital. The museum down there, and they actually have a whole bunch of recreated examples of them that were done by some of the First Nations folks who live down there. Really fascinating though. Between the trade and the engineering, just amazing. And there was populations too in certain areas where I used to work with the archaeology team for a while there. But the population in some areas were just beyond, was just crazy. I can tell you right now, these folks, if they weren't fully farming, they were getting pretty close to it because the population's evolved. you know, you can't feed them with fishing and hunting. Maybe fishing a little bit, but you can't, like, yeah, no, like, you need more than just, you know, gathering resources from the wild. You need to now start, you know, making your own. Because the population is that big, like sewage. I'm actually convinced that all these First Nation settlements had some setup for sewage and water, like sewage and clean and drinking water. Because there's a town actually local to where I live, I did a lot of work in, and they had, these days it's a population of about, I want to say like 3,000 or 4,000. But back in the day, it had a population of about 5,000 in the immediate area. All up and down, all up this little valley there, but it was a proper, like, city. Yeah, no, like, really heavily established. And you can't have 5,000 people living in one place without starting to have issues with sewage and clean drinking water, getting everyone fed. Hell, firewood. How do you get firewood? You know, you need to get, get firewood for 5,000 people. That's a pretty crazy operation. Like, you're getting to some proper logging now. Fortunately, for archaeology, there's actually two unfortunately's about it. One of them is that a lot of stuff was intentionally destroyed or covered up by settlement for a variety of reasons. But a lot of it came down to land rights. If you ever want to see a really good fight, go into pretty much anywhere in Canada and bring up land rights, or First Nations land rights, and stand the heck back because it's going to be interesting. But a lot of land rights basically came down to essentially, we're here, therefore it's ours. And there is a lot of various issues that kind of arose just because people were playing various games and stuff, and they didn't want to, some people didn't want to pay what they needed to pay. There was a lot of effort actually from about 1920s onwards to basically, or heavily, in this area anyway, 1920s onwards, to straight up erase as much First Nations presence as possible. Because, there was legitimately good money in there. Fraud was actually super common. They had issues, actually, in all seriousness, my family is, like, a big chunk of, about half my family is where we are today because of some old-timey creative interpretation of law. So basically, my family has two branches. And what it came down to is the first guy in the family who came settled here, in order to get a little more land there, married a First Nations woman, and that gave him legal right to a whole whack of land under English law or British law. Of course, they didn't really ask locals because they might get an answer they don't like. Anyway, he married her, got the land, and they had a whole whack of kids. And then as soon as more white settlers got involved, he basically dumped her. Didn't divorce her because it was a Catholic ceremony. You can't divorce in Catholic Church. Doesn't like you divorcing. And long story short, married a white girl. And they ended up having a whole bunch of kids as well. So basically, between those two women, like half the local area there, it feels like sometimes, has familial connections to this one greasy old Scotsman, which is definitely something to think about. Yeah, no, the whole situation got actually pretty ugly. Um, and it is a little disturbing too when you start thinking about like the actual, nuts and bolts of how things were done. Like, but yeah, there's a whole half of my family there. Like that's yeah. Like there's a lot of unresolved hurt there, for certain members of my family. On a couple sides actually. For some, they're the ones that got, basically ditched. They used and ditched. Is how they feel essentially. Um, and I will say this guy too was very successful. I passed everything on to his white wife's kids. So there's kind of a weird dynamic in town. I tend to stay out of as much as I can, but it pops up every once in a while. Where you have one chunk that basically, practically owns half the town, and the other chunk there, who is just results have varied about how this time my family's done. Most of us did okay actually. But yeah, no, so like very successful. Well, actually, I am the side of the family that had the First Nations in there. A lot of them actually very successful. But they tend to be successful as tradespeople and professionals, small business owners, whereas the other side of the family there is more, their success is more in the flavor of, owning the biggest, businesses in town. It's kind of sliding away now, though. There's been a few bad investments and such, and it's just, yeah, but still, like, you can still tell, like, the town is still affected by that little bit of legal wheeling and dealing about 150 odd years ago. Um, but yeah, no, and so we actually had a family member on the other side of the family do for a college project. They did a full family tree, which is really interesting. Like both sides of the family, both sides of the family, we were all bugging them for copies of it because it was it was really well researched, and it was really interesting, and there was a lot of shared ancestors there. But the line that he had basically disappeared with my grandmother on that side, or my grandmother there, because she just kind of popped. She married a white fellow, and back in the days when you married someone who was white in your First Nations, you'd lose your status. And so she just kind of dropped out of the paperwork essentially. That the person doing the family tree could access, and so that line kind of just died essentially from a whatchamacallit, a academic in a academic sense. And so we were there, and so we were there, and we got talking and everything, and we noticed that the line was a little short. So a bunch of us, chat with them and all that, and we ended up adding, we took sheets of paper, we added about another 2 generations onto the family tree, and added about 30 names that that person wasn't even aware of. Yeah, no, it was really interesting though. I will say after that little that whole college project actually brought the whole family a lot closer together. more than anything else. Because they did set up as like a family reunion too, so we all met up. We had burgers, hot dogs, checked out the family tree, everyone chilled out, and we really got to know each other really well. And it turns out that all the craziness that most of us in this family share came from that greasy old Scottish guy, which is actually pretty funny because we all all my cousins when we hang out, we all get along. Like we don't really bicker or anything like that. We're all completely off our rockers. But we all get along really, really well. But yeah, that little experience there though really got the two sides of the family basically the best closest thing to the two sides of the family actually getting along properly. It was quite an interesting experience, to be honest. Unfortunately, a lot of this stuff too in Canada um, kind of dives into a couple other things that are kind of oof. So one of the big ones, so in South Africa they had the apartheid, where they basically divided the whole country into black and white, and it got pretty damn ugly really fast. It held on till basically the mid '90s until Nelson Mandela got elected. But there's the fellows who set up apartheid worked for the British Empire, and they were professional administrators, and they were nasty, nasty folks. So they started in Canada. They set up the Indian Act, residential schools, which has been argued now pretty convincingly, to be honest, that those were both basically attempts at cultural genocide, if not outright genocide. And then they went on to Australia, the same thing to Aboriginals, but they were even nastier about it, and yeah. A lot of people talk about, oh, Ned Kelly was so amazing and everything, but one thing that Ned Kelly was known for doing, and a bunch of the other various famous Australian outlaws and lawmen, was straight up using Aboriginal folks for target practice for fun. Allegedly. And it wasn't prosecuted as murder or anything like that. It was just like well, that's one of the things you get to do when you live in Australia. Shoot the kangaroos and the Aborigines. It's just brutal. Anyway, these guys went to South Africa. In South Africa, they had free reign to just go completely hog wild. Basically, blank check to do whatever hateful things they felt like doing. And it is, yeah. A lot of people there. Elon Musk has actually made some legal issues about people saying this kind of thing over the years. Doesn't like to admit it, but he ran into the little problem is it's not defamatory libel if it's true. His family was heavily involved. His original startup money for his current businesses was family money, and it came from mining in South Africa at the height of apartheid. Some of the worst mining disasters in history happened down there in that era. I don't know if his family was involved in those or not, but it was very brutal. Definitely a really, really unpleasant way to make a whole lot of money really fast. A lot of times there, like, this stuff wouldn't be counted. South Africa, actually, one of the most prolific serial killers was from the black population, and he only targeted other black members of the black population. And he didn't get investigated. They didn't actually find him until after apartheid, when black police officers started getting on the case. and they found him almost immediately. He was not hiding anything about what he was up to. And yeah, this guy killed dozens of people. And just because it wasn't considered to be a priority by the white authorities, he essentially was allowed to get away with it for years and years and years, decades. But it's not exactly what you call a good look. And what's his name? That one director there he did District 9, Elysium, Chappie. He basically came of age, as apartheid was kind of reaching its height and right before it collapsed. And so when he has these videos about, how like societies can be divided and the injustice of that, and justice how societies are divided, I have a weird feeling that, I have a suspicion there that his childhood growing up apartheid and things he saw might have had a pretty good influence on that. Like, yeah, no, like a lot of people there, a lot of folks like to quote unquote, literally and figuratively whitewash a lot of history, but they always forget the one big thing at the end of the day, and that's a lot of these really horrifically discriminatory laws and regulations, stuff that we're experimented with. The thing you gotta remember about them is that, legally speaking, they weren't the first step to making those, actual, like those kind of things happen, those laws happen, was to make people not people. Yeah, a disturbing number of folks were very adamant on that point. Like a lot of the laws that were involved with that kind of deal, slavery in the U.S., slavery in general, actually, all the various brutalities that have taken place over the years, slavery in the U.S., apartheid, Canada and Australia's treatment of indigenous people, hell, the Russian occupation of Finland. It's not really too well known about, but there was, the Finnish population were treated that way quite heavily. Japan did that to the Okinawans and what they call the Ainu folks who live up in Hokkaido. China's doing it right now with the Uyghurs. But the first step to doing carrying out any kind of stuff like that, you have to make the person not a person anymore. Something about the human psyche doesn't really deal too well with, committing horrific atrocities against other humans. And, check out World War II, all the propaganda people marvel at how racist it was. It had to be. You can't burn an entire city full of, innocent people. Some are guilty, sure, but a lot of them are innocent. To be honest, when you start doing area bombing, you can't turn an entire city into ash and live with yourself with it. And a lot of folks in the military, it haunted them for the rest of their existence. Some stuff they witnessed or did. And so there's a huge effort. There had to be this huge effort to humanize the enemy. The USA and Japan were kind of the most obvious about it, but there was all sorts of stuff there. one really popular one there is you show, like, you know, your side is humans, and the other side is like animals, with, like, you know, whatever symbols on supposed to be on there. Someone saying, like, you know, there's the whole, like, you know, Russia, the, you know, the clearly strong and handsome Russian worker, you know, pulling a snake with, you know, a certain little symbol on it. You know, that's, you know, out of, like, you know, some kind of, like, a house or something like that, throwing it off, like, stuff like that. I can't remember a lot of details there, but it's, yeah, no, so, yeah, the level of brutality you get, though, is quite, it's quite interesting how you can get that brutality going. Which actually is, not gonna lie, is one of the reasons that a lot of stuff that's happening down south, you know, ruining people's legal rights and stuff, is so concerning. Because, you know, yeah, it's not just the rights, it's not just legal rights they're removing, it's, you know, they're setting a precedent. And, you know, legalese, precedents are basically the core of the legal system. So, even if, you know, so then, you know, so you set the precedent, and then you can kind of keep plugging along, using that to basically aid yourself in more and more extreme cases. The real question is, where does it end? You know, I'm not too happy to think about the return of fascism. And actually, my grandfather was German, and he fought in World War II on the losing side, of course. But yeah, there's pictures out there that I'm not really able to show anyone, but they are some of those haunting pictures I've ever seen. Because it's basically, oh yeah, the pictures there. His family had my grandfather's family there had a tradition where every year the whole family get dressed up in all their best, and they'd get family photos taken, and they'd get photos of all the kids taken, all that. They were pretty well off. So, starting from when he was about 4, you know, I've seen pictures of him from every year of his life until he turned 4, and then at 16, he joins up with the German army. Now, I don't know about willingness or anything like that. I can't really speak to I can't speak to that, because some evidence says one thing, some evidence says another thing, and it's just, you know, I'm not digging into that kind of worms. Anyway, though, he's wearing the uniform at 16. At 17, he looks like he's aged about 5 years. At 16, he was a private. 17, he's a corporal. Really, really smart guy too. Actually, like my grandfather, really smart guy, really hard worker. Had a lot of quite admirable traits. Which really brought kind of a lot of contrast to what happened there. And by 18, he's fighting in Italy, and he's a sergeant, and he looks about 30. Yeah, no. And he lived with a lot of stuff that really was never resolved, that he had seen and possibly done. And at one point, when me and a couple of my cousins were hanging out at their place there, when we were playing around, using sticks and they were guns. That's the only time I've ever seen him really, truly lose his temper at any of us. He was so angry that we were making that into a game. Yeah, he lost a lot of family, both civilians and military. A whole bunch of them, just we're never gonna know what happened to him. He was, and actually also too, one of his hobbies was photography of all things too. So he took a lot of pictures just in general, like when he was around living life and stuff. After the war, he was living in an apartment, and he pissed off his roommate because he set up, he didn't have a room for a dark room, so he would go and use the lights in the apartment as his dark room. And so his roommate would be sitting there trying to read a book, almost all the lights would go out. Um, and then they'd be out for like, precisely whatever many of seconds or minutes it needed to be, and then come back on. And he used to piss off his roommates so bad, he was saying. But yeah, actually, Chunks of Swell album there. Not gonna lie, kind of considering getting copies of some of them and donating, or giving some prints of some of these pictures and stuff. Might be, I think I was almost debating about getting some and then giving it to a local museum to add to their archives, because he took pictures. He worked, after he came to Canada, he worked in all these logging camps and similar industries. And so he took pictures of everything because that was just way too fun. He's got pictures of him and his buddies. He's got pictures of his buddy playing with a pet bear that one of the loggers had. He's got pictures of logging equipment. Just really, really interesting stuff all told. But yeah, no, and then like we were going through his family. We were going through some of the photos he had though too. A bunch of them he had taken during the war, and he had notes in some of these pictures there where it's like listing out when certain people in the pictures, what their status was essentially, and almost all of them in his pictures there died. Yeah, it was pretty. It definitely left a mark on him. He had been involved in an accident too, actually, at the beginning of the war. Between 14 and 15, he was actually working as a railway, because Germany, to keep the total war effort going, actually recruited a whole whack of teenagers to basically take over the jobs that were previously held by fellows who are now off fighting. And so he ended up working in a railroad. He actually got crushed between two train cars, broke both his legs. Yeah, he lived with that for the rest of his life. He always had pain, and then at one point he ran someone with a tractor, he broke them all along the same lines because they never healed up properly. Yeah, that was a mess. Yeah, he never talked to us grandkids too much about it, but he talked to my grandmother a little bit, and they talked to he talked to my mom a little bit, my dad quite a bit, and then one of my uncles too quite a bit. So between those three different directions, they were able to piece together quite a bit of some of the stuff he was mixed up in, but it was not good. I know from his accounts there, he witnessed at least one of the massacres that the Hermann Goering Division committed down in Italy, where they basically went through this village that surrendered, and they shot everything basically big enough to be shot. From chickens, people, men, women, little kids. And just, it was that was the message, don't surrender. But yeah, he was talking about how they shot even the cows and the pigs. Which, like, just on principle. And like chickens even too, and stuff like that. Cats, dogs, chickens. They just went door to door shooting anything with a pulse. I know that left a mark on him. Seeing that, which to be fair, How could it not, right? And that's the worst part too, actually, about a lot of these conflicts too, is that, you know, they're so polarized to, you know, right and wrong, good and evil, all that. A lot of them kind of lose sight of the bigger picture. But, you know, it's just the big picture is really just the sheer number of ways people were destroyed in, like, every way. Like, yeah, no, it's just, oof. Like, yeah, no, like, yeah, this whole thing in Ukraine, too, that's going to have a very long-lasting influence no matter how it turns out. Russia, honestly, has been pretty much... Russia's not doing too well afterwards, though. They've got Putin in charge now. And the problem with Putin is that he's not a politician by trade. He's a intelligence officer, a spy. So what he looks for in a leader is very different than what, you know, pretty much everyone else, what other people might look for in a leader. So Putin's gone out of his way over the years to pretty much wipe out anyone who could oppose his rule. You know, that was kind of his jam for the longest time. But with that too, though, like, you know, that little, you know, by basically killing off anyone who opposes his rule or imprisoning them or making them, you know, not available to oppose him. You know, if anything ever happens to Putin there, Russia doesn't have a person to replace him who can actually, you know, be expected to do any kind of decent job as a politician. Which, you know, not great for Russia. And you have these oligarchs who are basically running the country, you know, and they're not used to laws, regulation, all that. They hate each other. You know, they're all thieving bastards, and they all know it, and they hate each other for it. And I really don't think they'd be able to get their... I honestly don't think there's anyone left in Russia that could really lead them out of the hole they're in. Or any hole, to be honest. You know, his boys from Wagner are no longer really a factor. Leadership Wagner, too, actually was a pretty nasty piece of work. They were known for being pretty unpleasant people. Yeah, they're gone. Like, the country itself is... You know, like, I know there's old Russia strong memes and all that float around, but, you know, Russia's not gonna make it through this in one piece. I'll bet just about anything on that. And then they got China and North Korea, and, you know, they're buying ammunition off both of them. And, you know, when your currency isn't any good anymore, what do you buy with? Well, in China's case, it sounds like it's land. China will be taking over chunks of Russia that are near their border. The Chinese are all over, too, by the way. Like, let's be honest. Like, China's actually been wanting Manchuria back literally since the end of World War II, when Russia took it and just kept it. Because that, for the longest time, was a traditional Chinese holding. So, you know, they're going to lose land there. The army's been gutted because that tends to, you know, because, again, any leader that poses a threat to the great leader can't be allowed to get power, so there goes pretty much all your half-decent, half-competent army commanders. Yeah, no, the whole Russia's always been an interesting country too. Like, yeah, no, between the Tsars and their shenanigans, and then they had the Soviets doing their thing. Now the Russian Federation, but like Russia's always been, well, like Russia's kind of had a weird situation. So when it was under the Tsars, um, everything's built around Moscow and St. Petersburg, right? Build everything around, where the Tsars could live and where they can see it, the folks of absolute power. And then as Russia got modernized and became the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union then, well, they're kind of limited in where they can build stuff. So they had a whole lot of administrative infrastructure, industrial infrastructure in Moscow and St. Petersburg, so those became big. And, you know, they're kind of limited, like where should you build if you're going to industrialize an area, where should you industrialize? It's a really good question, right? Well, a lot of times they actually chose Ukraine for that. Which actually makes quite a bit of sense too if you think about it, because Ukraine is close to the rest of Europe there. It's got really good weather, really good climate for growing. You can actually get supplies and equipment to it. And yeah, so Ukraine got industrialized. And yeah, they moved a lot of factories and stuff over the Urals, but they've never really been able to compete with Ukraine. Because when you bring stuff over because now, for Ukraine there, you want ships out of Ukraine? 2 days, boom, there it is, and wherever in Europe you want it to go. 3 days, it's in England, or it's in Britain. And with that kind of opportunity there, yeah, you got the Crimean ports too, and that opens up a whole other deal there because you can run down through the Crimean, or not the Crimean, yeah, not the Crimean, see the Caspian, sorry, Caspian ports and the Black Sea ports. The Black Sea especially, because you can load up in Sevastopol or Odessa, and then load them on whatever you got on ships, and then out through the Dardanelles, Constantinople, or Istanbul, and keep calling Istanbul Constantinople because I'm just setting the old ancient history mindset of it for whatever reason. But anyway, once you're out there, you take a left and you're down the Suez Canal, with a shortcut to all of Asia, which is a stupid big market. Take a right, you're along the Mediterranean with all the various opportunities there, then to the Atlantic and everything that offers. So Ukraine's kind of in a golden spot. They got actual ability to have warm water ports, which most of Russia, just because of geography, doesn't really have. Actually, some of the ships in the Russian Navy that are in the best shape presently are their icebreakers. And that's because, a lot of the ports up north there, ice breaking is kind of something you need. You don't see that a lot with a lot of Swedish and Norwegian ships. Where they're built either as icebreakers, they build a lot of ships as icebreakers, or they have cargo ships that are specifically reinforced to be able to operate as icebreakers. Or light duty icebreakers, so they have reinforced bow. A lot of times you see northern built ships, like Russian, Swedish, Norwegian built ships. And some Canadian ships too, actually. You'll see reinforced bows, designed to handle a bit of ice, stuff like that. Just because they need to be, just get in and out of get in and out of harbor. Which that puts Russia at a bit of a disadvantage there too, because without Ukraine you lose some of your biggest ports. You still got Port Arthur and Vladivostok, but they're all the way on the other side of the country through the Trans-Siberian Railway, which I think we can all agree the Trans-Siberian Railway is definitely one of the more impressive feats of railway engineering in history. Just simply because the land there, just the very land itself is fighting you every inch of the way you go. So it's not really economical to ship things all the way over to that across the country that way. Unless you want very specific markets, which is basically Japan and China, North Korea. And even then, there you gotta spend like a week shipping stuff across the country. Longer if you're doing it longer if it happens to be like winter or spring. The Rasputina, I believe, is what they call it, which is basically where all the snow and ice that's embedded into the ground all melts at once and basically just turns the entire area into gooey liquid. Ukraine and/or Russia. Yeah, you'll notice that a lot of times actions taken by both the Ukrainians and the Russians kind of match up pretty well too. They kind of seem to die down right around the time when the Rasputina is going to be its worst. Just trying to move anything at all just sucks there. Where I live there, this time of year, we have something similar there. About the same time of year, referred to as breakup. And during breakup, pretty much all the logging operations and industrial operations basically just grind to a halt. Yeah, it's just about a full. Breakup's usually about a full month where no one can really do any logging or any major industrial work. I've been on sites that decide to plow right through it there. And boy, oh boy, were they in education. Had to pull. I was present for a lot of vehicles being pulled out of. I was present for a lot of vehicles getting pulled out of the mud. And I do mean a lot. We had like bulldozers literally buried up, sunk into the ground, and they're trying to get them out of it. And they were literally stuck in the ground up to the cab. Like you just see the very top of the track sticking out of the ground, and then the cab. I believe with that one actually we ended up having to. I believe that one there, the mechanics dug out enough with shovels to go and basically safe out the engine. And they left it there until breakup was done. Then they brought an excavator in and dug it out because that was the only way you could do it, really. Law Trans-Siberian Railway actually, and also too actually to this day, the Transcontinental Railroad up here in Canada, our version of it, a big chunk of it is built on what they call corduroy roads. Because Russia, like the Canadian Shield chunk we have here, which is a combination of granite rock and these stupidly deep glacier valleys that are basically filled up with giant swamps. And Russia has a lot of the same issue, especially in Siberia, where it's either granite mountains that you literally have to chew your way through with all the high explosives presently known to exist, or it's swamps that can literally swallow up bridges overnight and are seemingly endless depth. So one step they would do there to get around this, they call corduroy roads, where they lay out logs across one another, and basically it looks similar a pattern. It's basically a pattern look kind of like corduroy, hence the name. Anyway, these corduroy roads, they then use them as the foundation for the train tracks. And so here in Canada, we got chunks of railway that are sitting on 170, 180 plus year old trees. Arguably the entire railway network actually that connects Canada together, holds the whole country together, is literally built on almost 200-year-old chunks of 200-year-old trees that were used to build basically the foundation, and then they put the gravel and everything else on top of it. That's still pretty much the best way to do it, which is even the crazier part. And Siberia has the same thing, except they started their railways under the Tsars quite a bit earlier than we started ours. By the time we started ours, it was pretty much agreed by just about everybody that 4 foot 8 inches was the proper gauge for train tracks, and everything in North America was built to that standard. Well, in Russia, when they did their railway building, Supreme little adventure, there was still some debate on what the best gauge for a train was, so they ended up settling on 5-foot gauge. Which leads to a whole bunch of different issues. But basically now, so one of the issues is too, this track is ancient, especially up in the rougher parts of Siberia. And you know, no matter how well it's built, nothing lasts forever, just that's a sad truth. And then if you want to ship anything into Russia, and I believe actually into Ukraine too, to a certain degree, you have to go to the border, unload it all from your train, European train, and then reload it into a Russian gauge train. Which is kind of an issue. Whereas here in North America, the system we use is basically everything in North America is 4 foot 8 inches. The only things that aren't are some very, very specific little branch line railways. There's not a whole lot of those either. Let's see what stands out. There's like, I think Denver and Rio Grande, and there's maybe like 1 or 2 other ones still operational. Like, yeah. Like that whole side of the deal there's pretty whatchamacallit? Kinda like, yeah, they just found that it just wasn't economical. So yeah, no, so like you could go, and if you want to though, you could go and actually at one point there you could go up to Churchill, Manitoba, which is like right near the Arctic Circle, like it's the polar bear capital of the world, quite literally. They actually have, it's customary in Churchill, Manitoba, where you don't lock your car doors, because if a polar bear is coming after someone, they're coming after you, one of the best ways to, and there's a car nearby, one of the best ways to escape the polar bear is to literally jump into the car, close the door behind you. And that'll usually, he'll snuffle around, maybe rip the car up a little bit, but he won't get to you. So in Churchill, Manitoba, people don't lock their doors, car doors. And a lot of them don't lock their house doors either, so if someone gets attacked by a bear, or a bear comes after them near the place, they actually have a place to run to. Which I think is pretty much all you really need to know about how many polar bears are lurking around Churchill. I think that's pretty evident right there. But yeah, no, so like, but you go all the way from Churchill, and then you could put someone on a train, or take a train all the way down into Central America. Yeah, no, and this was something people did quite a bit of the time. Like, this was very much an option you had. I believe the Churchill one, I'm not sure if it's still running or not, is the kicker there. They had some issues, they had some issues a few years back with the railway leading up to Churchill, Manitoba, where some of those corridor roads I was telling you about there that they were using, some of those blew out, and they had a huge washout. And I'm not sure if they fixed it or not. But yeah, no, it was something. Well, you know, so like, you know, but yeah, you can ship though, and when you're doing that shipping though too, that all stays on that shipment can basically stay on the exact same train car the entire way. You don't have to take it off the train and then move to another one like that. It's just move the train between railways, which is pretty darn impressive. But yeah, that's one big issue that Russia has still as leftover from the Tsars. And they're kind of in a no-win situation there too, because, you know, what do you do? If you upgrade all that track, that is stupid expensive to do. shit ton of work and everything like that, and you're going to uncover, and every time you do a big project like that, you always find issues that, you know, weren't going to be issues until you unearthed them. You know, areas that are washed, that, you know, are kind of iffy and they need to replace, but they're holding together, and as soon as you start disturbing one little piece of that fill that's, you know, have any problems there, the entire thing just kind of falls apart. And let's be honest, trying to set up a big engineering project during a war tends to be a little problematic when most of your workers and your industrial capacity are going to fighting said war. So they're kind of in a no-win situation there. Well, yeah, they'd have to redo a lot of the track work. They actually have to redo the entire track work. And you probably reuse most of the rails, but, you know, not all of them. You know, a lot of his, in places with good roadbed and track, we would be able to probably just rip up the 5-foot track and then immediately drop down 4-foot 8-inch track. But, you know, that's no guarantee it's going to work properly. Which is kind of the kicker, unfortunately. But yeah, no, there's a lot of ways to use other gauges too, still, mind you, but Japan uses, I can't remember what it is, it's custom gauge though for their Shinkansen railways. Those kind of get a buy in that department because those tracks are built with one train in mind and one piece of equipment in mind. That was the Shinkansen. The tracks were optimized to handle high-speed rail. Anything else that happens to go on those tracks is built around the track's needs. That being said, though, there's been no accidental death. That being said, though, Shinkansen actually is pretty amazing for high-speed rail. They've had no deaths, no accidental deaths on the train involving the Shinkansens. Even when they had those big, horrific earthquakes, no passengers died. Which is pretty impressive. Especially when you consider how much things moved around and all that. And they have set up though, so the Shinkansen itself actually has these little, they have the wheels, and they have these little tabs that come down and basically lock the train car to the wheels. And so so if it derails, it'll still stay kind of on the track station. It won't pile up and do all sorts of funky things, like plow through apartment buildings or anything like that, which has happened in Japan before with urban rail. But yeah, no, the only time people have actually died on the with the Shinkansen there from incidents with it were folks who unalived themselves, which is again pretty impressive there. But then again, like somewhere that's a custom, that track's built for one purpose, and one purpose only, that is to move the world's fastest train as near to its top operational speed as possible. And I can tell you right now too, somewhere out there they have a chunk of straight track that they used when they broke all the speed records. Because yeah, no, you need to really get a perfect track for that. Yeah, no, I love the Shinkansen though. My wife and I are talking about going to Japan with a friend of ours in a year or two. Hopefully, if everything works out. And Shinkansen's definitely on the list of things I want to see. And then one of the things my wife wants to do too is actually, the only real way to access it from Tokyo is to go on the Shinkansen, so. But yeah, no, love that whole setup they got there. That's so beyond cool for me. But yeah, no, if you're gonna do, the moral of the story though is if you're gonna do weird railway gauges, you really better have an exact reason for them. Pretty much the only narrow gauges left are tourist trains, and then a few industrial railways actually, if I remember correctly, still use narrow gauge. But these railways literally are just going around a factory. Steel mills have their whole railway networks. And some of them are still narrow gauge. But most actually just use standard gauge now too. There was actually one fellow who built this really cool model layout, 4x8 foot sheet of plywood, but the whole thing is one steel mill that he compressed by about 50%. He used one of the small steel mills in the U.S. and he compressed it by 50% to fit it down, where buildings would have 3 doors. He did it so they had 1 or 2 doors, things like that. Just narrowed it down that way. Made everything a little bit smaller while keeping it looking more or less the same. Compressed it down to about 50%, and he just barely fit onto a 4x8 foot sheet of plywood. But it's all set up. But yeah, he does operations with the steel mill's internal railway, which is pretty darn. Which says a lot there actually. Like, there's some folks there too who've done layouts there, and the whole layout is that's one that sticks to my mind. There's another one where it was like a rayon factory or something like that, where again it had a whole internal rail system essentially. That one there though, they were running full-size trains through it. They'd be getting full 100 plus cars trains of coal in, and then be sending out 100 plus boxcars of rayon and similar synthetic wood products. It was just, yeah, really neat. But anyway, I'm gonna take off here. So the day's coming through here. I gotta get outside and do some more work, doing some brush clearing, some burning, so that'll be fun. And I'm gonna talk to you guys all later. So yeah, peace out and see you all around.